All right, good morning, everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started here in just a minute. I'm letting people kind of hop on here, and then we will start building bridges, assuring design intent through purposeful plant procurement. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Before we begin, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Jamie Heflin, and I work here at Midwest Ground Covers in the marketing department. I am going to be your host today. Mostly I'll be behind the scenes, making sure that the slides get moved forward and keeping an eye on your questions and answers as they come through. Before we begin, I do have a few housekeeping items. The cameras and microphones for attendees have been disabled. So please, if you have any questions, please do type those into the Q&A box. We may take some questions throughout the webinar, but we will likely hold most of them towards the end. We will have a couple of polls throughout as well, and those are anonymous. This is being recorded, and we will share the recording following the webinar. And I will also be sending out a quiz for those of you who are interested in the CEU the CEU credits. So the way this works, just as a heads up, the recording can take like an hour or two to process. So once that is processed, I will send out that email. It will have the recording in it, and it will also have your quiz in there so that you can go ahead and take that. So expect that by, early afternoon today to get that. And now I would like to go ahead and introduce our presenters today. It's a pleasure to introduce Krista Oram-Keller. Krista is a registered landscape architect and chairman of the board here at Midwest Ground Covers and Midwest Trading. Krista provides strategic leadership, focuses on business vitality, sustainability, and long-term growth. With a passion for expertise in native plants, conservation, and sustainable landscape practices, Krista has spent much of her career supporting the growth of ecologically driven design in our industry. She has held leadership roles with ILCA, now Landscape Illinois, IGIA, and ILASLA, and currently serves as the Kane County Forest Preserve she serves on the Kane County Forest Preserve District Foundation Board. We also have joining us today Matt Dinkeldine. Since joining Midwest Ground Covers in 2023, Matt has focused on building strong partnerships with landscape contractors, garden centers, and wholesalers across Midwest's 12-state territory. He works closely with landscape architects, design-build firms, and retail garden centers throughout northern Illinois and eastern Wisconsin. With 30 years of hands-on experience in cultivated landscapes, Matt understands how critical strong grower relationships are to maintaining design intent and ensuring smooth project execution. Supported by Midwest's industry-leading logistics and educational resources, he partners with landscape architects to help select and secure the right plants for the right places. Matt also earned his Sustainable Sites Initiative Sites Accredited Professional Certification in 2005. And with that, I am going to go ahead and turn our presentation over to Krista and Matt.
Well, good morning, guests. Good morning, panel. Good morning, Krista and Jamie. I'm so glad we're all here together to talk about this topic that's very exciting for us and very important to us as well. We're talking today about situations in which planting design matters most to the integrity of a project, whether designer-driven or client-driven, and where plant choices are deliberate and have a clear purpose. And if there were some kind of chance substitution for a specified plant, there would be a point of contention. Throughout our presentation today, we're going to highlight the importance of planting design in the ground plane. When site work is complete, infrastructure installed, structures built, constructed features assembled, it's sometimes up to the planting design to finish telling the site's story. And with planting design intent being a spectrum of function and aesthetics, it determines how a landscape is going to be used, whether for historical preservation, habitat restoration, natural area establishment, or for adornment. Design intent is going to determine how a site will be used for rest, for work, for play, and whether it is managed after installation to be generative, to be beautiful, and perhaps my favorite, the wonderful combination of both. Catherine Deary, who's the director of horticulture for the Millennium Park Foundation and the steward of Lurie Garden and Millennium Park, describes design intent as a feeling, an experience that considers the full range of sensory and placemaking experiences possible in the cultivated landscape. So today, along with Krista and with the help of our guests, we're going to discuss ways to secure the intent of your planting design, maintain it through the installation process, and to encourage you to reconsider how, when, and why you engage with your growers. Krista?
Thanks, Matt. Yes, thanks, Matt, for that introduction. And thank you, Jamie, for getting us started and for keeping everything rolling behind the scenes, which if I had to do it, we wouldn't be real successful with that. So I really value all of what you've created for us to be able to have this conversation today. And thanks for the introduction, Matt, and your thoughtful words. I guess I wanted to start by also saying that our article that we put out in Landscape Illinois magazine and kind of the foundation for our conversation today really came out of many conversations that we've had over time, or conversations that we have again and again. So I hope part of what we get to do, and I'm so excited about the guests that are joining us throughout the webinar today. I'm excited to hear what they have to say, but I'm excited to engage in the dialogue that we get to have. So I think a key part of the conversation and the topics today are there are projects where our choice of plants is less forward or less in the forefront of what is most important about the project. As much as we plant people, are sad about that kind of scenario. And we are always thinking of plants first. The reality is that the conversation we're having today is really focused on times when the curation of the plant choices is super important in how we're executing the design, and where the plant choices are really, you could say, in the lead and are critical to the mission of getting the design intent across, and any utility, any eco-services or other functional outcomes from the design and its presentation. So I think that theme will come forward as we go through the conversation today. So I think we're ready for the next slide.
Thanks, Jamie. Great landscapes start with great ideas, and great ideas come from client vision, from singular elements or layered elements described in my opening statement, things like conservation and ecology or aesthetics, or trying to make some kind of contrasting statement, placemaking with materials, history, and of course, beauty. And from site context to pre-design and on through the site design process, these great ideas, when that sequence concludes, do not yet install themselves. And there can be gaps in between the site design, construction, and operations and maintenance phases that can start to erode a very thoughtful, purposeful vision. Those visions do live on paper. They also live in minds and in hearts and in conversations. And those need to be translated, communicated clearly, and understood by all of the stakeholders responsible for successful execution of a landscape design. And realization, that journey from the concept to completion, part of that does live in the supply chain. And plants can move from a drawing to a plant list to the ground, and sometimes with very minimal involvement from some of the people that know them best. And that is the people growing the plants, shipping the plants, and ensuring the quality of the plants. So the growers. And there are times where planting intent, planting design intent, or maybe an ecological or aesthetic component of project intent can get lost in that process. So today we're going to continue to talk about what if nursery professionals weren't just vendors at the end of the process? What if we were collaborators when the pens are still on the page rather than when the shovels are in the truck heading to the job site? Shaping the palette, helping guide feasibility, and helping ensure measured, goal-oriented planting success. Slide.
So the objectives that what we're going to try and cover today is kind of having a conversation about where planting intent breaks down, and why the current process can struggle, and how early grower involvement can potentially help, and simple changes that can improve the outcomes. So one thing I was thinking about, Matt, as I was preparing, I thought about how my experience and your experience are kind of unique. I think within our broader green industry, we often become so focused on whether it's through education or just through our experience, our work experience, we become siloed. And when I was studying landscape architecture at school, I felt like I was kind of odd person out at that time because I came from this nursery background and I understood that growing process, and my outlook was that plants were so integrated into that design process. And and within within the curriculum there was just this very, very strong focus on design, rightly so. But uniquely, my background of having so much grower influence and experience, and then having that design foundation and connecting and understanding and having dialogue with landscape architects and design professionals is kind of it's a unique bridge that I come with. And I think your experience too, then when you look at folks that are in a design build kind of office, as your experience was for much of your career, you're kind of also living in two worlds, the design world and then the reality of execution, as well as, the dreams of the client. And then you're moving into the grower space. It's like you have the perfect, I don't know, triumvirate of all those pieces. So I think part of our passion, and when you and I talk about things, part of what happens is we start talking about how can we help and how can we do better. And I think that is also the foundation of, why are we talking about these things in this session? It's like we want to make the outcomes of what our industry does, and especially when design professionals are investing so much into intention on planting design and the outcomes, which I think we talked about also, seems to be there's more of a movement within our industry in that direction. So that I guess I thought too, it's kind of maybe important to share a little bit our personal why of why do we care about this, and where is it we're coming from in terms of wanting to help. So these are the objectives we have for the session as we go forward.
Yes, connecting people, design professionals, Midwest customers with solutions is really such an important thing to us. And it in this more conceptual process, while developing this presentation, we learned that even as time has progressed, there's strong design foundational design education. There's great use of education when it comes to the tools that landscape architects are using today, and there still remains a little bit of a gap when it comes to horticulture,
Yeah.
even some years later. So I'm excited to
And
hear Catherine and Brett talk about that a little bit later in the session as well.
And you just said something in the beginning of what you just said about bringing solutions, which reminds me of our fundamentals. And I think that we're so driven as a team to bring solutions that is that's at the core of what drives us as well.
Yep. And part of bringing good solutions is asking great questions. And we have our first poll of the session. So, when are growers typically becoming involved in your projects, guests? Is it during plant selection? Is it post bid or during construction? Is it at ordering? So please take a moment to answer this question. And if you have come up with any questions for us or for our guests during these first few slides, please don't hesitate to add them to the Q&A section. Um, we will be monitoring that throughout the presentation to see if there's anything timely, but we will mostly be banking them for later. So you don't forget, please make sure to ask us any questions using the menus, assuming you're using Zoom Workplace just like we are, using the menu down at the bottom to find the chat for the Q&A. Sorry, the Q&A chat, not the regular chat. Okay, so predominantly, you're interacting with your nursery professionals at the time of ordering, which in our experience is anywhere from a matter of days to a matter of weeks before shovels are to hit the ground. So 9% of you during concept or schematic design would be so happy that after we all work through this presentation together to see that grow. Thank you for your responses.
But if you go back, I don't know, Jamie, if you can bring that up again one more time, the results. The second most highest answer was during plant selection. So that's encouraging.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Ready for the next slide. Great.
So, as Matt and I approached writing that article, which I think that article is going to be available to you, well, it's available if you subscribe and are part of Landscape Illinois, but from a couple of months ago, I think it was published. But the article's, I think, also going to come out with the notes and the presentation after the webinar. But we looked at, okay, how do we kind of look at what a typical project flow looks like? And by looking at the project flow, what can we learn from that? So uh, from our viewpoint, obviously things start with a client, and the client has, some requirements and some discussion, and then there's creation together with the design professional, and that can be obviously a very long process. A long duration and lots of interaction, but there is that design process that happens together with your clients. And then once the design is created and prepared, and we move into the how do we implement the project. And bidding occurs, and then there's a contractor selection process, and that can be depending on whether it's a public project or not. Different methodologies of how the contractor selection occurs. And then the contractor is chosen, and now the contractor gets involved and starts to work on sourcing. In our case, we're focused on the plant part of the design, sources plants from growers, and then eventually comes to installation. So that was kind of in a nutshell how we looked at the process.
Yes, and when we started to delineate this is a pretty, as Krista described, this is a very typical design sequence, and we are typically getting involved, both from our own experience and from the poll we just saw, very far at the end of this process. And we acknowledge that planting is sometimes as I said earlier, the very last part of a project. There's grading and site work, and there's irrigation and infrastructure. and there's flat work, and there's walls, and there's benches and basketball hoops and trash cans, and there's all these things that have to happen. And then the plants come in. And we want to be involved in that design sequence, after the context of the site is established on the design team, and any pre-design steps involving any site users or key stakeholders. We want to be a part of the integrative design process, just like an ecologist, a landscape architect, any other kind of specialist that is involved in shaping the design sequence. So during the site design component, after grading is addressed, we're going to get to materials and soils and vegetation, and you're going to hear two different stories today about how two landscape architects approached that process, what professionals were involved, and how they leveraged available nursery information to successfully execute the vision of their planting design. So with that in mind, I'm pleased to introduce Brett Seelman, principal of Seelman Landscape Architecture, and his associate, Alex Priest.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, everyone, for your time this morning. My name's Brett Seelman. I'm the principal of Seelman Landscape Architecture. And as Matt said, Alex Priest, who's a senior associate, will also be presenting on this project. Today, we're talking about the Esta Barrett Manor and Grounds, the historic formal sunken garden. The project is part of a 600-acre country place era estate, and it has a gentleman's farm as well, and it's located at the confluence of the Kishwaukee and Rock Rivers right outside of Rockford, Illinois. The site is a combination of meadows, woodlands, agriculture, and intimate garden rooms like the formal garden. This site was also an important meeting place for Indigenous peoples, with a portion of the site previously having effigy mounds and needing to protect and understand how that should potentially be a public amenity in the future. The site is also listed on the National Register of Historic Places. With that, we determined that there was a period of significance between 1916 and 1947 when Esta Barrett was living on the property, of which we were trying to turn back the clock and restore the formal garden to that period. The grounds were designed by O.C. Simons. He was the only Midwest founding member of the American Society of Landscape Architects, and he worked on many properties from the North Shore up the Rock River Valley. In 2023, we first got involved on the property. We got invited by Jens Jensen with Jensen Ecology to really look at the 600 acres and focus in on the rehabilitation of the formal garden. Our scope included historic research, cultural landscape rehabilitation studies, and organizing a phasing and implementation plan. The image at the top right shows the garden in 2024, right before the rehabilitation. It was a lawn panel. If we look at a lot of our formal gardens, and as private country estates transitioned to different owners, over time, it was easier for the owner of the property to maintain lawn, mow lawn, than take care of what was very common, really perennials and plants and annuals in formal gardens that needed a lot of tending to. And the image in the bottom left shows the same view of the garden in 2025, 1 year after the rehabilitation was planted. Our first task, after we sort of got approval for a plan in February of 2024, so 2 years ago, the client swiftly wanted the garden to be constructed in the same year. And understanding the schedule with Jen's connection with Midwest ground covers and our use of Midwest ground covers in our specifications for projects, we knew that availability, knowing that the client wanted to construct a garden the same year that we were getting approval to proceed, we needed to understand what was available, and that really became a driver for the project. It helped us build our planting pallets from a very early stage, soon after we got approval. We also wanted to turn the formal garden concept on its head. No longer were the country place era estate days where the wealthy client had a team of gardeners tending to their roses and other annuals. So we decided to only use a forb-heavy, showy, floriferous native perennial palette. And we're excited to share some more of those images now. So next slide, please.
Good morning. My name's Alex. I'm Senior Associate at Salmon Landscape Architecture, and this is one of a handful of historic images that were available of the property. This is from 1935, showing Esta in her garden. The garden in the article was described as a riot of colorful blooms. And we reached out to around 100 different archives, collections, libraries, museums, universities, looking for more information about what the garden looked like and potentially to understand the historical layout of the garden. As Brett mentioned, when we arrived on the site, it was a lawn panel. So we were looking for the historic information about the property. We were able to locate one aerial from 1939 that in the very bottom left of the aerial showed the historic garden layout. And we took that historic aerial from the period of significance and did targeted research studying comparable gardens from O.C. Simons and other country place era estates and align the historic photographs with contemporary surveys to reconstruct the garden's historic layout, circulation, and planting structure. Next slide, please. Part of our practice is creating conceptual collages to help us understand and frame out how we're going to be moving forward. In this conceptual collage, we see at the in the foreground the character defining L-shaped hedges, which framed the garden's colorful flowers. We are working within the Secretary of the Interior standards, and we, along with the board and staff at Esta Manor and Gardens, selected rehabilitation as our plan for the garden due to the limited archival materials. Behind the hedge is Esta on the right and O.C. Simons on the left, and behind them is an arrangement of multi-seasonal native Illinois plants. Next slide, please.
This rendering shows Jens's initial vision for the planting plan. And this initiative to only use native plants came out of discussions with the board, the staff, and aligned with philosophies of Jensen's practice as well as ours. And that we really wanted to redefine what that riot of colorful blooms means for a contemporary formal garden where we don't have a full staff to maintain the garden. The lower maintenance was key while also sticking with Esta's original intent of colorful flowers. So working with Jens, we developed 7 different curated planting mixes that dealt with the different microclimates in the garden, from areas that were going to be full sun, full shade, partial shade, but also thinking about scale, where we could afford to put smaller scaled plants versus moments in the garden where we could add some height. Next slide, please.
So with that initiative, we produced these conceptual plant collages to help us understand plant relationships, bloom color, and seasonality. We selected straight species native grasses to serve as the backdrop for a selection of multi-seasonal forbs, which are in the center. The forbs bloom and recede over the whole growing season from spring to fall. And what's on screen now are 2 of the 7 curated plant mixes. Some of the plants that we selected from Midwest ground covers are Monarda, prairie dropseed, aster, columbine, maidenhair fern, little bluestem, purple prairie clover, and phlox. And there's quite a few other plants that we worked with Midwest ground covers to source, but these are just 2 of the plant mixes. Next slide, please.
On the top left, a little bit larger than the image previously shown, shows the garden before we started our work. Again, mostly lawn. The center area had some iris plant bed that we transplanted to other areas of the property. But you can see on the bottom left, the crew began by laying out the garden and doing deep spade edges cut into the sod, where we were able to sort of finesse and regrade the garden. The bottom right images show those character defining hedges. We know from the historic images that there were these L-shaped hedges that hugged the different plant beds. And more than likely, those were privet. We had noticed in some of our woodlands on the property that the privet had started migrating, was invasive, as we all know. So, the one non-native here is using a green mountain boxwood. We used instant hedge, and it really helped form the garden from day one. We thought it could also be an opportunity to add not only a deer-resistant hedge, but also one that was evergreen, which helped hold the form of the garden throughout the year. The top right, we planted over 5,000 native perennials from Midwest ground covers. We did a hyper dense planting of 12 inches on center to help with weed suppression and competition from the start. And this was a community effort. Sealman Landscape Architecture, Jensen Ecology, members from the board and the staff, and area gardeners all came out to plant the garden. And we were able to plant 5,000 perennials in about 2.5 days. Next slide, please. This image here, this was taken the last morning of plantings. You can see how we were able to utilize the existing lawn. So there was very little bit of lawn work that would need to take place. And by doing the deep spade edges, we were able to clearly define the beds, which allowed for just easier maintenance over time. You can also see how these L-shaped hedges begin to really define the garden. Next slide here. In June, they had a garden party, and so 9 months after planting, and the garden looked good. But this image taken a year after shows sort of the power of planting smaller species at a higher density. This is exactly 1 year after planting. And you could see the moments of the garden where we wanted to plant higher species versus moments where the beds were more intimate and we really needed to keep the scale of the plantings down. Jamie, I'm trying to delete my delete my markup that I just did.
Okay. I'm not really, are you on the annotate tools?
Yeah. Here we go.
There you go.
Sorry about that. And not only using native, turning this formal garden concept on its head, but it really reflected Simon's design principles about using native perennials and strengthening ecological resilience and long-term stewardship. So let's go to the final slide here. Just something to reiterate here, this was a collaborative approach between what was available from Midwest ground covers, given the schedule of the project, the board, the staff, and Jensen Ecology. And it was a really research-driven effort and a plant-forward approach. Overall, the lessons that can be learned from building bridges between us as landscape architects and designers and the nurseries from the early stage of design. I hate to use this analogy, but you can't be a successful car salesman if you don't know your cars. And the same is true for the relationship between a landscape architect, designer, and the nursery trade. We need to know what's available, which nurseries are the best for which type of plant material, whether that's perennials, shrubs, or trees. We need to know what is available seasonally. These nurseries change their availability throughout the year, and they all have incredible online resources to almost get instantaneous availability, real-time availability. And we not only need to know what's available from plant species and types, but what sizes are available and what are their price points, so we can help calibrate costs for our clients early on in the design process. For publicly bid projects where lower bidders usually win the bid, it's really important that we're building in the best practice nurseries in our specifications so that information is available to bidders and they know which contractors and nurseries to reach out to. It really is critical for the success of the project and it makes for a smoother construction and bidding process. There's fewer substitution requests that come in. Finally, nurseries can really provide a wealth of information that cannot be learned from behind a computer screen. You can rely on your nurserymen and women to understand what cultivars are available, which ones are better performing in certain environments, urban, rural, etc. What does the current stock look like? And okay, maybe the stock this season or this year doesn't look very good. What substitutes would they recommend? And finally, landscape architects and designers, we should not only know our plants, but we should love our plants. And I think you'll see the same true for Kasha as she speaks here a little bit later. But it's really our job to love the materials that we design with. So thank you all for your time this morning.
Thank you, Brett. I'm going to bring forth a question that one of our audience members asked, and that was to kind of clarify, were you saying that you wrote into your specifications specific nursery suppliers, or that you have a method for doing that? The question was like, can you expound on that a little bit more? Do you actually write into your specifications like approved growers, for example?
We do. And it especially in low bid situations, it allows us to establish a baseline of quality. We will put in one or two, depending on the type of the project, whether it's publicly or privately bid. Within our planting schedule and in our specifications, we will provide more information on those nurseries of where to procure material. On this project specifically, we also knew that Midwest Ground Covers had almost everything that we needed, if you will, to come up with a very diverse palette. And that allowed us to minimize the number of nurseries we were selecting plants from. It helped us streamline shipping, availability, all of that. So we do build that into our specs. A lot of times it comes with standard spec language or approved equivalent, but that makes the contractor have to work to justify that their nursery source is just as good or better. And that's where we're able to really hold these lower bid projects to a higher quality standard.
That's interesting. Thank you for clarifying. And thank you for the presentation, both you and Alex. I get so excited when I see your visuals, and I know Jensen. I know how he must have engaged with you both and engaged with this project, and I have a sense of how much attention and thought went into the planting design side of this. So for those of us that are plant people, and especially native plant people, it's super, super exciting to see a project like this. It's just amazing. So congratulations on a great project.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here today as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, Alex, you're going to stay with us for the kind of Q&A panel and discussion at the end, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you again for sharing your project. And I think it kind of, that illustration of that project and how it came to being goes back to, I kind of alluded to at the beginning, there are different types of projects, and if the project, let's say, is probably a multifamily mass development, the planting specification may only get to the level of, a shrub of a certain size in front of this unit and that unit. And that's a very different kind of project when it comes to the planting choice and planting procurement as compared to something like this, where there's so much thought and so much intentionality all the way through the design process from the historic perspective, and how that's manifest in today's vision, while still trying to hold on to that the historic preservation and nod to the history of the site. I see another a question. Was the plant palette a collaboration with the client or totally specified by the design team? So I don't know if you guys could answer that as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. This was a true collaboration. I think when Jens had reached out to us, and he knows that he's not his third great grandfather who also called himself a landscape architect. His focus is ecology, and he knows these plants better than I'll ever know these plants. But we had a client that was very educated on plants as well and very active in Illinois garden groups and organizations where there was a day where we spent 8 hours working through these 7 different mixes, and it came with Jens's knowledge. It came with the client's knowledge of what grew, what they've had success with specifically on their site, and it came from sort of our desire more from how we envisioned the mix and the ratios of grasses to forbs to height and scale. So it was a really incredible combination between client, ecologist, and landscape architect.
Really neat. Thank you again. Getting us back to kind of the typical project flow, I guess you could say that was maybe an atypical flow, but maybe one that we want to emulate. And before I hand it back to you, Matt, I again picking up on part of what you said earlier. When we look at this process, it works. It works in maybe the majority of cases, kind of this process and the steps toward implementing the project. I think that what we're also driven by is when we're trying to help at the end of the process, and there's frustration based on availability at that moment and the requirements of the project. So that's also part of the driver. It's like, well, how can we help? And how can we help solve this challenge for our customers and in the broader industry when we're out? I think this conversation comes up again and again with specifiers and with installation contractors. The challenges and sometimes the frustration when things are compressed at the end of this process. So much of what we're going to continue having a conversation about is how do we bring solutions and how do we try to maybe reduce some of that stress and some of that frustration as we go into the second half of the process.
Yep. And again, tremendous contribution to helping us tell this story, Brett and Alex. When we talk about these projects, it probably sounded familiar to someone, right? It was a very unique project. The client, of course, is a very unique client setting, but through these incredible before and after photos, we've seen the power of communication, the power of knowledge, and then at execution of density to have the site reward guests and reward stewards with movement and texture and a strong sense of place and this acknowledgement of history. And it was all done on actually what sounded like a pretty compressed timeline. It sounds like it all came together in one season. So there's still time for it when there is dedication to maintaining that level of communication. So to Chris's point, yes, let's talk about it. And the question about specification was great. Look forward to revisiting that one later. I have some thoughts about that as well. So on these tight timelines and with all these different stakeholders, there are a lot of opportunities for the process to hit some roadblocks. And we're sensitive in this industry to delays from weather, to delays from labor. And what an incredible opportunity to have a group of volunteers install 5,000 native plants within 3 days. No labor challenges on that project. So that's an incredible story there. When the disciplines are clearly defined, we also can assume that roles and responsibilities are clear. So on this project, we heard from the landscape architects, and they worked with an ecologist, and there was a very horticulture forward, plant driven client, and then a skilled contractor. And of course, the site users are also part of this conversation, whether directly involved or not. They will be present on the site. Hopefully they got to visit the garden during that late summer and fall period of which we saw those beautiful photos. gaps in those collaborations can appear and can start to widen in the absence of clear and consistent communication. And it sounds like Brett and Alex made communication a priority, whether and Jens throughout their process with excellent presentation drawings, those really lovely photo collages. Designers will specify plants, and we heard about love of plants. And Brett, thank you for articulating the theme of our presentation, building bridges so clearly. Contractors source the plants, growers fulfill orders. So we end up siloed. And thank you for this excellent narrative about what happens when collaboration is pursued and communication is pursued at a very high level throughout the duration of a project. Next slide, please.
So I think we're moving toward where the challenges come. So design under pressure, and everybody who's in our audience probably in the previous slide, I was looking at the plants, and in the presentation, I was feeling joy and excitement about spring, just thinking about what's going to come out of the ground and the planting that we get to do and planting design we get to do in this coming season. But when we're in the middle of projects like this, so the pressure comes forth. So design under pressure, some of the pressure points uh, can find their way forward. So the more compressed that design system becomes, the more the timeline is squeezed on, particularly as the process goes forward, and you all know how that goes. The schedules get tighter. Sometimes budgeting slows certain things down, and sometimes it limits what we're able to do. Then we have issues sometimes of availability depending on the season. I think Brett, talked about that quite eloquently, what happens to us in the nursery industry. Typically as the spring goes on, you have some availability tightness as we start the season. Then as things grow and we get more crops planted, there's kind of like an abundance time. And then, summer, we get weather challenges, and then there's kind of like a fall abundance as well. But there is a kind of a curve of availability throughout a given season as projects are happening, and much of that is weather dependent, which is, as we know, unpredictable and uncontrollable. So these are some of the points that kind of add pressure to the process and maybe compress parts of that process. And then if our communication is limited and if our time is limited, and that makes it harder to spend effort and time on the communication, that also can bring pressure to the whole execution of particularly planting design.
And when moments of project execution get excitable, communication can be the first thing to fall away. Whether weather deadlines, any number of delays can cause, in my experience, communication the first thing to drop off. Detail, frequency. Losing track of that intention is an incredible way to start to lose track of project intent.
And I think it's not always it's not intentional. A
Right.
lot of time it's just circumstances of our seasonal
Yes,
business where we just have the pressure becomes great, and it's not intentional that anyone is not communicating as well as we can. It's part of the circumstance.
that's right. And when there's not a point person to carry that torch, planting can be one of the easiest things to make malleable, rather planting design. So earlier, site work, infrastructure, built features, those are harder to obscure. You can specify a paver shape, you can specify a basketball hoop. But when it comes to plants, well, there's 5 achillea and they're all different colors. And well, there's 3 types of pycnanthemum in the catalog. Well, that one's out right now. It won't be back till fall. Which one can we get now? And we maybe erode ecology or we erode a vista. So availability surprises come when crops can move fast. Suddenly, a crop can move out of a nursery very quickly. And we would, and I know we're not alone in this among nursery professionals, we'd love to be able to plan for that. So whether due to sales or cases of plant health, availability surprises can come. Aesthetics, as I mentioned, can be compromised in these settings. But in the case of a last minute substitution, phlox is not phlox. And there was a really interesting moment a couple of years ago where a landscape contractor was working from a set of CDs, and he said, "It doesn't matter what phlox I need. I just need phlox." And of course, garden phlox is different than creeping phlox, which is different than woodland phlox. So someone had a vision there. The process broke down, timeline got compressed, and they ended up with a warehouse landscaped entirely with creeping phlox in that particular setting. So we don't know what the intent was, but we would prefer to not erode those kinds of design choices over time. Next slide, please. Great plant for this slide. Shooting star has a high degree of ephemerality, and we find that sometimes. So we'll see out of season specifications, whether due, as Krista mentioned, to seasonal curves in popularity, ephemerality. Sometimes a plant needs to look a certain way at a certain time, and it didn't look the way it did in the catalog when it arrived on the job site. So communicating those visual qualities can lead to some misunderstandings. Hard to find sizes and quantities. Brett acknowledged some flexibility in finding sizes and quantities as long as the varieties were available. But sometimes sizes are spec'd, and we see this more often now than ever as the nursery trade kind of transitions from field grown material that's a certain range of heights to container sizes. So that's a conversation that we're always part of. Plants unsuited to site conditions. We will see things on plant lists that don't quite make sense for where they're going to be planted. And I think the Elsa Barrett Manor gardens can stand as an incredible example of careful planning around quality of sunlight and character for the garden. None of these breakdowns generally, save for maybe specifying plants that are out of character for the site, come from bad design, just from limited amounts of information at some critical point in time. So that's my thoughts about that. Let's move on to the next slide.
So the real cost, essentially late decisions or compressed decisions late in the process can lead to a diluted design intent. So essentially not achieving the design intent from the design professional or from their collaboration with their client. Installation stresses, maybe planting things out of season at the wrong time, too late, too early, in drought. Long-term performance issues from those installation challenges and stresses. And again, if the wrong substitution was made within a species, sometimes there are differences in how the plants perform in terms of their characteristics or their cultural needs. And all of those things can then create negatives for the installer as well as the design team in terms of client dissatisfaction, the need for replacements, and challenges in terms of the outcomes on a site. I thought this was an interesting photo that Jamie intentionally shared, and we had a little discussion as we were preparing for the presentation today. As we looked at this, this is you could say the polar opposite of the Esta Barrett mansion in terms of well, maybe not intention. There's could be intention in these choices of plants, but intricacy and thoughtfulness of plant choice may be a little bit different. And for a commercial landscape like this, This probably doesn't require what we're talking about in terms of as much longer term planning or involvement of a grower in a process, or a plants person, the expert like an ecologist in a design. So I appreciated Jamie including a photo like this to kind of bring a little bit of contrast as we talk about what is it we're trying to identify solutions for.
And I was so glad we had that pit stop during that conversation where we thought about the contrast between a very intricate planting plan and something like this, which is very functional. And it still works. It still uses plants that offer a lot of movement and seasonality, but they're just of two very different characters.
And
And
it's attractive and functional and
mhm,
probably meets the needs of this client.
yes, yes, exactly. And one thing that this these differences thrive on is communication. And when you the contractor, when you the design professional can tell us, your goals, if necessary, if you want to involve us, we will lead with curiosity. I feel it important to acknowledge that there's a tremendous amount of trust in this process. You are going to go to your nursery of choice because you expect the plants you're looking for to be there. And when they aren't, we want to listen for any ambiguity and help you solve. We want to bring solutions to that challenge that you are facing.
I
Next
think we
slide,
have another
please.
poll coming up, right?
Yeah. Yes, we do. So, what is the most common plant related challenge that you find in your practice that you experience? Are they availability conflicts, forced substitutions, any installation delays, plant failures after installation, or if any of you choose other, we would love it if you would add to the Q&A what your others might be. Krista, I see another question down in the Q&A. Is that something you would like to ask or answer?
Sure. Is there another way or set of plants to create a defined edge in an informal native garden other than a boxwood hedge? Um, well, some of it probably. I mean, yeah, I see Brett potentially has a thought. I'm thinking like the first thing that came to mind for me was obviously doing a hedge requires maintenance. So I actually think a boxwood hedge is probably there's some durability to that, and it's probably a pretty good choice. But I mean, you could use perennials that have more of a form to them, perennials that could be pruned. You could use other shrubs. What are your thoughts, Brett?
Yeah, I don't think you're ever making a decision with plants that's isolated sort of from a bigger picture. And here we had very limited archival information from those very few historic images with the aerial. One thing that we knew was that the existing privet hedge was invasive, so we weren't going to use privet. When we started to explore other native plants that could have made up that hedge, there are really no native evergreens to the Midwest other than, some of the pines and the Norway spruce that do well here. They're more adapted than they are native. We knew that we wanted that contrast between the riots of color, between the perennials. That boxwood hedge really allowed us to provide something, like I said earlier, not only that would hold the garden's form in the wintertime. Formal gardens are about form, but that it would have that contrast with the deciduous perennials.
I mean, you could use a hardscape element too. Did you, that was,
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's where you should draw what you see, not what you want to see in these landscapes. Being like filtering through the Department of Interior standards for historic preservation. Like I said, we chose rehabilitation. We knew that there was a hedge. We knew that there was a softscape feature that made up this character defining feature. So we knew we wanted to use a softscape.
Mhm. Thank you. So back to our poll, availability conflicts being the number one plant-related challenge.
And I
And I
wonder,
think,
for those of us that answered plant failure after install, I'd love to hear more about that when we have time for it. Because is it because of site conditions? Is it because of actual or perceived instances of issues with plant health? So let's revisit some of these later. But availability context conflicts is very clearly ahead of all the others, wasn't it, Krista?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
Well, here we are. Our
yeah,
proposal for you, our guests. And
yeah.
that's to adopt a different model, one where early involvement, conversations and communications with your nursery partners will yield a shared sense of success. It's not complex for the designer. We're not trying to make it more complex, rather, we're trying to make it feel more collaborative and therefore more productive. If we, the growers, are invited during the plant selection phase, even informally, not always asking for a seat at the table, but if there is ever an opportunity for that, we would relish it. It can radically improve project outcomes. And better yet, it can reduce time pressure on contractors and, of course, increase or at a minimum maintain design fidelity for the design professional.
Yeah, and a lot of times the conversation that the grower is having is with the contractor solely. So I think at least in some cases, it's it may be a fresh idea to say for the grower to ask the question about design intent prior to suggesting, if things have to happen at that moment, prior to suggesting substitutions. It does really help if the grower can understand the context of things when they're recommending a substitution, especially in that situation. Um, I think another aha moment for me as we were preparing for today's webinar and having conversation, and then inviting our guests to share their projects. I had a kind of a moment of reflection thinking about when I first got involved in the industry and was working in design build. And I think we're at this, I don't know if it's a watershed moment or I feel like it's kind of like we're in a renaissance time of having more effort and thought and focus being on planting design, which for me is super exciting. And if we think about that, I mean, I just think as we prepare for, many of us are going to iLandscape next week, and we think about all of the education opportunities, there's really a lot of conversation about ecosystem services that our design spaces are creating, and just a lot more focus and a lot more opportunity to collaborate in a way that hasn't happened historically. So I think it's something to celebrate and something to be excited. I'm excited about it, and it's a great opportunity for us to really look at this part of our work as more of a movement of togetherness and collaboration and thinking together about planting design and the impacts and the opportunities. So yes, I think our foundation for a better model is to invite is to invite or to promote inviting ourselves into the conversation and the process earlier. And even if the grower is involved at the end, I think at least we as a grower are inclined to go to move toward connecting with the client and the design professionals to start there in order to be able to help with the wisest options for planting choices for the design intent to have integrity.
Yes, and when we can understand what is driving the intent behind those planting plans, we can offer more targeted support. And whether that's identifying a plant with the right movement or availability, or suggesting a drought-tolerant alternative that aligns with the intended color palette, whether that's a riot of color. I really have enjoyed visualizing that along with Brett and Alex. Um, we're here as willing partners in the process.
Jamie, I think we're ready for the next slide.
Mhm.
And I see there's a comment in our Q&A about the comment is this is more of a comment rather than a question. But the comment is Megan says she uses the availability lists from suppliers as a guide in the design process, and thinking out on a sort of 8 to 10 week horizon. And she says, of course, I design with what I want to use, but availability, like balancing availability and that information sounds like that's a really great tool in terms of how she's executing her designs. So what we're sharing here is really that real-time availability insight. And sometimes the conversation is better, is even better. I mean, it's great to have those tools online to be able to see that as you're working on design, but sometimes there are things that there are, you know, we can pivot, we can move some things around, or if we're in conversation with the growers, there are opportunities for you know, bringing something forth quicker, or something that is on a different schedule if we don't know that a customer needs it. So so having the dialogue and being able to understand what is available or what could become available with a little bit of tweaking. And that all helps with we need to know what are the lead times. I know that's always difficult, but even if you don't know what the lead time is, when we get to the contracting side of things and the installation time, the more information, the better. So if it's like, well, we're hoping for 4 weeks, but it could be 14 weeks. It's better to know and have that conversation, and then be able to kind of know what we're dealing with, and the bookends of how challenging that could be. We can also, you know, potentially recommend alternatives that can. I think we've kind of talked about that. I've talked about it. That meet the design intent but provide the outcomes that are needed in the project. Matt, you've been talking about substitutions.
Yes, substitutions, any kind of compliance support. And if we go to the next slide, I do have even more to propose. So all of this is intended to reduce friction. So this doesn't require contract grows, pre-grows, any complicated systems. It really relies on conversation and knowledge. While Krista was talking, as a child of the 1990s, I kind of pictured the more you know. If anybody remembers that from their Saturday morning cartoons, knowledge is power in these conversations, and they perpetuate and build on this hopeful transformational message that Krista outlined for us. This is a great time to be in the nursery business, especially when you are interacting with design forward professionals, whether contractors, landscape architects, or planting designers. And frequent focused interactions with us will drive your client engagement, will elevate the integrity of your planting designs, and produce desirable, successful outcomes. We've talked about real-time knowledge of availability, recommendations for resilient species and cultivars, support with any administrative needs, forecasting for pre-grow opportunities. And we're going to talk during the panel a little bit about the importance of getting to know your nursery partners. And each nursery is going to have a different requirement for their contract grows, but you're not going to know about it if you don't get out and talk to them. So, so that's how we can reduce friction and make it easier for you to get what you're looking for or what your client or project needs. Next slide, please. So we visualize it very simply as an equilateral triangle in shape without the psychological triangulation that we often encounter when these start to go awry. Can you believe the landscape architect specified this? Can you believe the grower didn't have this? Can you believe the contractor bought this instead? We want to get those conversations off the table completely. I'm not so myopic that I think that they're never going to happen again, but I think we can elevate ourselves as professionals to be committed to a communication process where we are accountable, we're sharing knowledge in a way that makes us responsible for the outcomes and maintaining the intended outcomes, whether for project or design intent, for ecosystem services or aesthetics or any of the wonderful things that we've discussed already. It's an integrative approach to design that celebrates individual strengths and areas of expertise while prioritizing communication and platforming collaboration.
I'm pulling out of pulling another element out of this, which is a little more I guess up in the sky rather than boots on the ground. But as you were talking about this, I was realizing from conversation earlier this week with one of our team members who's doing a presentation next week at iLandscape, who wanted me to pull out like our reason for being at our company, and we can't fulfill our like we can't do our most meaningful work without design professionals and clients that are making green spaces and landscape contractors who are installing them and maintenance teams who are maintaining them. So our like beyond our mission reason for being is we talk about that we heal the earth and people through the green spaces our plants and our products inspire. So part of why, Matt, you and I get excited about the conversation and how we can help and how we'd like to see more nurseries be involved earlier in the process is because by doing that we get to like kind of fulfill our higher power or higher reason for being as growers by helping fulfill successful projects that are out there that get to bring that healing to both the earth and people. So I think that that's, at least for me, that's an important part of what we get to fulfill by helping support this process.
Yes, lucky us.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also our fundamental of the week here is be positive. So I feel like this is our great opportunity to be
Mhm.
positive. And you kind of made a nice picture of kind of some of the sometimes how we get siloed, but we're trying to overcome all those things in our effort to be helpful and also be positive. I can't wait to get to our broader conversation. But I see some comments too about some of our audience members who are validifying that they get to be part of playing this role within their organizations and in working with contractors that are executing designs and grower suppliers. So that's exciting as well. Um,
Yeah, I
the,
look forward to
the
exploring
Renaissance
them.
is here.
Yeah, it's here. And let's reflect on those comments while we reach into our next poll. So, the last poll of the conversation today. So, would being involved with your grower improve the output of your projects? Yes, possibly, not sure, probably not. Um, Hoping, yearning for yes here as a representative of a nursery grower. Some great comments down here, um, acknowledging that, as Krista was saying. Let's see, Krista, you want to share some of these with us while we wait for our results?
Sure. We have one participant who says, I'm in regular conversation with growers about availability as well as questions about plant suitability for cultural and site requirements, and these conversations are a great asset to the design process and help, create great outcomes. And another person is commenting about agreeing with the collaboration for availability. They're in a role that is a plant buyer in a design build firm, and acts as the intermediary between the suppliers and the design team, and is really focused on that conversation about design intent and how can that be executed at the highest level. And then they end with the question, why are there not more positions like that that are fulfilling that role in our industry? Because that kind of support role eliminates many of the problems that we're describing, and ultimately helps the client and helps all of us fulfill our higher outcome at a better level. So
And
yay.
that particular guest works in a firm that is doing work at a very high level for very talented landscape architects in Chicagoland and in Southeast Michigan. So for her to ask that question, let's keep having that conversation. Let's elevate this. Let's make it important. Let's platform
Promote the
Kathy.
value.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, I'm so pleased to introduce our next guest, Catherine Liss, Senior Associate at GGN, and she is going to profile an urban meadow for us today.
Thank you, Matt. And
Catherine.
thank you, Matt and Krista. This is it's really wonderful to be part of this conversation on such an important topic, and a topic I'm also very passionate about, of course, loving plants. So I'm from GGN. We're a landscape architecture firm in Seattle, Washington, and I'm excited to share a little bit about this project in Seattle, where we did an urban meadow. Next slide. So this project is located in Seattle. It's really close to downtown, actually. You can see downtown in the background there, and the Space Needle. And it's also really close to this highway interchange, which is one of the interesting things about this project is that, this doesn't always happen in the city, but because of this tunnel work that they were doing, and cities have to reorganize some streets sometimes. This site actually used to be a road. A part of it was a roadway. And because of these reconfigurations, we ended up gaining land right here in that triangle that's highlighted in pink. So if you go to the next slide. So this is that same we're still looking the same direction, like towards the Space Needle. This is the site basically in 2019, right after they've taken away the roadway and put down probably a little bit of soil and then just seeded it with some grasses. And, basically the owner, so the adjacent property decided to purchase this parcel. So because it had been a road, it was basically effectively public, but then the owner, when they purchased it, it became private. And as part of that land swapping, if you will, basically there were some public benefits associated with this parcel. So it was it was purchased by the owner, so it became private, but the public benefits were still required, and the owner had to deliver those over time. And those were effectively, creating a beautiful space here with planting. And then the owner wanted to maintain some flexibility in case they wanted to build anything here in the future. So they wanted to limit the amount of I want to say, trees that they were going to install here. So they would just allowed for that flexibility in the future for them, while still creating a beautiful space that the public could look into, but they couldn't actually go into. So we kind of had a really interesting set of design parameters here to create something beautiful that the public could see and enjoy, potentially also a habitat, but something that didn't have any trees in it, let's say. So if you go to the next slide, we almost kind of immediately thought, well, why not a meadow, basically? Because wouldn't it be amazing if we had a beautiful meadow here that everyone could look upon? And, meadows kind of had started to trend at that point, really being popular. So that wasn't like the only reason, but we also just wanted to share like more information about the meadow. And if everybody could walk by and see this space and also in a prominent location with the highway there, then this could continue to kind of inspire people in this urban environment, even of what is possible in these spaces. So this is our quick rendering of what that could be. This is actually looking back the other way. And we even have a couple trees in here, which we ended up having to actually remove. So we were still hoping for some trees, but we did get some street trees along the edge. And then if you go to the next slide. So as we started to go into the design process, so again, we knew, again, this is a site downtown. This is going to get some weed pressure. It's very exposed. It has some very specific site conditions. And we started looking at sourcing seed for the meadow, mostly because we knew that meadows actually tend to establish better from seed, but there was also a cost component of this as well. Our budget was pretty low for this project. So we needed to kind of tailor this based on what was feasible for our client. So we started looking at, so this was, we kind of decided on our design vision, and then we started almost immediately looking at different nurseries that provided seed. And we were initially looking at seed mixes because that would be easier if we just found the ideal, perfect native meadow seed mix. Unfortunately, those were really not quite available at that time. This is actually a more recent screenshot of the Northwest Meadowscapes website, which has the native pollinator meadow seed mix. They actually have two now. Those were not there before. So we were looking mostly, there were a lot of lawn seed mixes with some flowers, and then there was a lot of deer defense seed mixes at different places. And we just felt like that wasn't quite right for this, what we were envisioning with our client for this space. And so, we started to look at, well, maybe we could source individual seeds and mix those in. And then, somewhere along the way, we realized that, we really need to develop a specific seed mix for this project. And at that point, felt like, maybe we needed more help. And so the other thing that was helpful when I was, again, looking at these different nurseries was I saw that consultations tab, and that just kind of like, put a question in my head is like, I wonder if they would be interested in working with us. And that's like always like, again, my plug is always like, if you find anyone in any searches or nurseries or other, stone suppliers, anyone that you think would want to work with you to develop something during your design, just reach out to them, because I can almost guarantee that if you're passionate about their material, they may want to work with you about it, because they're probably passionate about it too. So a lot of the work that Eric Lee Motter, who's the owner of this, and he's actually part of the Xerxes Society as well, a lot of the work that they had been doing and are still doing is conservation work and more like restoration work. This was a little bit different. This was a designed landscape more for aesthetic, but we did also want to obviously create habitat. But he was interested in working with us, which was wonderful. So if you go to the next slide. So we initially started the process with him just for the seed. They have a lot of different native plant seeds, and we were working with him on developing that. You can even see that in the sketch on the right, in the image on the right. It said seed only, involve meadow consultant in specifying. So again, we're kind of developing what we think would work based on our knowledge, and then kind of working with him to see what is available, what he thinks based on those plant relationships as well. And then that's where we started. But then, this frame plan that Shannon Nickel in our office created, she's our main design lead for this project. What you see in green and yellow there is container plantings and bare root plantings that we determined we needed to frame this open space of seed, so that basically there were at least framed areas that were growing a little bit faster and establishing a little bit faster around the edges, so that when folks were walking by this, it didn't just feel like it was all kind of open. And it takes time to establish a meadow. And so again, we wanted to create these frames so that there were almost not immediate, but sooner things were happening, and people could appreciate those moments of landscape. It also will give us, a buffer from kind of all sorts of things, maybe some even other weed seed blowing in, like could it serve as other purposes too? So we were developing this whole planting, and then we actually had an opportunity to bring Eric into our office at one point. I think he had like a visit nearby in Seattle because he's not directly in Seattle. And so we brought him in and we just showed him this plan. And of course, like just getting in the room with somebody that's also passionate about plants, we just started talking about the whole entire thing, right? So he's all of a sudden telling us like, well, that Douglas aster and Canada goldenrod actually established better as a bare root plants than seed. And, they would probably be more of a jumpstart plant versus including them in the seed mix. And so like those types of conversations started to happen. And so we ended up kind of revising this based on those conversations and then sending it back to him. And it was really a much more back and forth process than I think we ever anticipated. And then because of that, I think you can go to the next slide. Oh, actually, yeah, go to the next slide. Well, because of that, we really started to collaborate. We brought him into the client process as well. Like we actually had him present on, the kind of way that the meadow, would need to be managed, and like what kind of habitat would be expected in terms of like the types of insects that we could see. So there was just a lot more involvement in this process with him than I think we anticipated. And then, yeah, you can go to the next slide. And then I think that the other plug I'll make, which I heard Brett make too, is that, I think there's actually two moments where this process could break down, at least from my perspective. It is certainly in the initial, like, if you never call the nursery and you don't even know what's out there, then yeah, you're probably going to get a lot more substitution requests. But if you spend all of this time developing your vision and your planting palette and your design intent, and then you need to do a really good job of communicating that in the drawings and specs, because if that's not there, then the contractor doesn't know the amount of work that you've put or thought you've put into this design. And the drawings are really important because that's obviously the specific plants and all the information. But I would say the specs are also just as important because they're actually the written document of what needs to happen in order to execute the drawings, right? And so those really have a way of, we always envision the perfect team, perfect collaborator, contractor's great, everything's working wonderfully, we have a wonderful communication, but that doesn't always happen. And so the specs kind of hold your intent and hold a place for you to point to if things don't go as planned. And, I don't want to talk about too many bad stories, but like, you're getting things on site, or the contractors, you're arriving and they're putting a plant in front of you that you're not even like, this isn't even close to what we put in the drawings. And so you have a way to say like, I'm rejecting this plant because, for any reason. And so that's like in the specs, right? Like I have the right to reject any plant for any reason. And then also the other thing that's in this one specifically is the source quality control. So like this doesn't, again, always happen, even if it's in the specs, but ideally we get a list of, okay, here are all the plants that you have in the drawings. You noted that these could be the places we could source them. This is where we're sourcing them from. And so this is like a verification again of like, this is where the material will be coming from if you haven't had time to go to that specific nursery or call them, or but you know it's available on their list. Because that's another way that we can then say like, well, they're using that nursery, but I know it's available at this other nursery, you know, so you can kind of like help yourself to refine that for them, even if they're saying they can't find it or something. Next. And then I just wanted to finish on, so in a year also, like this was a very quick timeline for us as well. We things were already coming up. This is kind of July of 2020, so almost a full year from the start of kind of our thinking about it. And basically this is a lot of Clarkia coming up because that's the kind of annual that comes up. But the wonderful thing that I wanted to note too is because we got Eric involved in the client conversations, we were actually able to secure kind of his time to help manage the meadow for a longer period of time after it was installed, which is, again, I think, like, if there's another thing we could add to, like, let's keep pushing this, is either grower, installer, or landscape architecture involvement after installation, because I think that sometimes things get installed and then the management of it kind of gets broken down a little bit. So based on the design intent. So in this project, we were able to maintain that a little bit longer with his involvement. And it was just really wonderful to see, he was able to go out there and identify like, okay, there's some like really scary weeds coming up. We got to get out there and pull them out. Or, look at all this establishment that we're getting and just, communicate the diversity of the plants that we were seeing in the landscape. And then finally, the really exciting thing for us is that, again, because he really has a amazing knowledge also about insects, he was able to identify that we were getting, bumblebees that were not common in this urban environment. And so just big picture wise, it was just really wonderful to be able to be part of this project to create something that would be atypical, I think, in an urban environment and allow it to become a habitat for pollinators that, again, are a more diverse kind of set of pollinators here. So thank you.
Ooh. Wow. That was a really cool project. Thanks, Kasha.
I agree.
Yeah,
I think it's very, very cool. And I wrote my own list of questions to ask you or comments. So I think your comment about like reaching out and asking a grower or a supplier to engage, I think that curiosity and it's I think that's the key to being able to do things that are beyond what we maybe normally think we're capable of doing. And this is a two-sided question. So what fosters that curiosity, what allows that to happen. And then I'm thinking about I think that most of the people that are in our audience are experienced or somewhat experienced. But it seems like there's a real opportunity with people new into the industry. I guess I just hope that there's an encouragement of curiosity and enough time for people to be curious. But I'm kind of like, is that curiosity there? Is it present for all people who are trying to do great things in the design world? And how do we encourage that for people that are new to the industry? I think about my own, young adult children. They're very hesitant to, like, they find it, I think, they find it hard sometimes to ask questions. So what helps us give confidence, and as a nursery supplier, like how do we make people feel welcome to ask questions and to ultimately come out and have a visit and look at things together, because I think that's where we learn the most. But your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I do. So I think my hesitancy with calling stopped when I had to pick up the phone in the office a lot. So I think, I do recognize that a lot of folks do have hesitancy, but I think then, I would say it's on me, it's on Brett to encourage that in the offices we work in, to, be like, just call them, just ask. Like, we shouldn't feel, I think there's like this weird, like, especially even now more, I think, than when like I grew up, right? Like, even more of a hesitancy, like, oh, I'll just email them. Like, I don't need to call. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I feel like we should encourage the calling more, like,
The real dialogue.
the real dialogue, because you'll get to really talk to a person then. And, sometimes, yeah, maybe the phone number doesn't, like, sometimes it's a hit or miss, right? Like, you don't always get the conversation. But I think when you do, the person on the other line isn't going to reject you. I guess, I don't know, like, where does it come from, right? It's that hesitancy. They're going to actually probably be excited to talk to you too, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I've just found, like, again, like I said, especially if it's something you're curious about and passionate about that you found, and you like, yeah, I think that, of course they're going to be excited to talk about someone that's excited about what their product is or what the plants that they're providing, right? And I don't know. I mean, I guess to hear from your end of it, like, maybe it is a hesitancy of like, oh, am I going to take too much of that person's time? And like, maybe could you speak to that? Like, how do you feel about like that part of it?
Yeah, there's one of the questions in the discussion is, as design professionals, how do you develop a relationship with nursery growers? And I really think the when I think back to, and again, we had this conversation as we prepared for today. Matt and I were talking about, back in 1990, in the 90s, as here in the Chicagoland area. I think if you talk to long-standing nurseries, we could identify, one or two key landscape architects, I think one of whom might be in the audience today, who at that time, those were the ones that would show up at all the nursery things and were the ones that really were curious about plants and really engaged. And we were so excited, all the growers were so excited to have that connection, to try and understand and to work together. And I think there's a welcoming from the grower end that I would say my experience when I was in school, I think that there wasn't always, maybe there were nurseries that one approached as an LA or an LA student that you didn't feel so welcome at, but ultimately, I think we're just so excited to have anyone come out and see what we do. And really the best thing is to go out and look at the plants together, because I think that's where
Yeah.
we all get excited. And I mean, I'm sure that's the same for other suppliers, of hard goods and all that kind of thing, to really get in a showroom and really see the stuff and talk about it maybe together with the installer too. So it's kind of the whole team geeking out about how do we figure it out together, and how do we know our products and help work with our installers so that we get the best thing for the client and for all of us, because then we're all excited. I think we're
I
moving
think
into our panel discussion, aren't we? Like, and I know
very seamlessly we slid right in.
I think there's more questions popping up. My other thing on my list was about maintenance. You touched on that, and how do we steward projects in the future? And many times that's the difference between success and failure, is really in that phase after the installation. And it always makes me so sad particularly when I see native plants installed and then the project becomes potentially a failure or an uninstall at some point in the future. So there were some questions about how exactly were you doing the maintenance on the meadow, and I loved your comments about afterward investing, having the client understand the value of investing in having the whole team come and look at, oh, how do we make sure that how we're stewarding, especially in those first years, is going to lead us to long-term success with, in many cases, less maintenance.
Yeah. Should I try to answer all of those questions?
Yeah, sure. Or all of you jump in and
I
go ahead.
I think the first one, how did we manage the meadow? So yeah, I think again the client or the owner was really their team, their management maintenance team. I like to call it management, but maintenance. Maintenance team was the ones out there actually doing the work of pulling the weeds and making sure that the irrigation is running and things like that. But like I said, it was really valuable to have Eric Lee Motter go out there periodically. I think he went. So ironically, we installed this at like the wrong season, which I don't probably should. We can get into that if we want to. But basically, he went out there in May. And then in June and July, and then he went out there one more year after that. And so it was basically during those visits, he was really identifying the critical things that needed to be weeded out because that's, again, we kind of know that, and also making other observations about potentially like soil amendments or compact, like he was seeing some compaction. And so like, how can we add some compost to amend the soil to make this a little bit better? But again, like really tailoring that compost so it doesn't have too much nitrogen because we don't want all the weeds to come up from that. So you know what I mean? Like those types of like really specific recommendations. So just having, and again, like it wasn't that expensive. I feel like it was only like $3,000 or something crazy because it's only like 3 visits, right? But he's able to like go out there and visually assess what's happening and then provide recommendations to the owner's team that they can then execute, right? Like they can go out and be like, okay, we have a picture of this weed. We're going to get all the ones that look like this, like,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, and he even made recommendations. I was reading through this because I was trying to make sure I remembered everything about how to tailor the irrigation system, like actually to water less frequently but deeper. So water less frequently so that the water was infiltrating longer, but then, or water more during the times that they were watering, but then less frequently. So they were drying it out a little bit more, which is more like, again, native plants are more adapted to that versus, again, the weed growth, as we know, high nitrogen environment, very very much irrigated every day, you're going to get more weed sprout that way. So we're trying to figure out how we can kind of tailor the management to set it up for the native plant success.
We could talk a whole day probably about maintenance
Yeah,
and
that's
Yeah,
part two.
totally.
site stewardship and how successful projects.
Yeah.
I
And get
do
a whole
have a
bunch more people involved in that conversation too.
I do have a prompt for Kasha and for Brett that came up when we were both talking separately. And I think it's important for us to talk about the happy accident that came together when I said, "Hey, our other guest on the call is a guy named Brett Sealman. Do you know?" And Kasha immediately lit up. And I think it would be great if the two of you and I would like to include Alex in this as well, if you could talk about your academic and professional origin stories and how those impacted your appreciation for plant material.
Brett, do you want to go first?
Oh goodness. Yeah, I can go first. So I am from Iowa. I went to Iowa State University. It's part of a 5-year program. They kick you out your 4th year. I went to Michael Van Valkenburg Associates in New York, and I was very fortunate to sit next to Kasha in the office. And we were, talking about this the other day, that as a young designer, you don't learn if you don't ask questions. And I just wanted to commend Kasha for being patient with me and answering all my questions. But with that, we worked for Michael and with a team of designers that loved plants. And I think that helped fuel our love of plants, not only from learning from plants, but really appreciating how they can be used in the garden. My 5th year, I went to the Royal Danish Academy School of Architecture and finished schooling there. And then I joined Michael's office in their Boston offices. Worked there for around 5 years before I started my own practice here in the Midwest. And Alex and I met at Iowa State, so that's how I know. That's when Alex and I started our collaborations together over 20 years ago.
I'm curious, the Iowa program, do you feel like was a good focus on plants? I mean, that gave you more of a plant-focused foundation?
I do. We were in the prairies and we were in the woodlands and we had to draw plants and we participated in burning prairies and we had we were out in prairies for 8 hours at a time. We took a trip from Canada to Mexico down the Mississippi River to study how species and different types of tree families coexist throughout the different climates. And so it was a plant heavy education, especially during the early parts of our program.
And then I'll just quickly note, yeah, so that's similar to, I mean, I'm like, now I'm jealous. I'm like, I want to go there for school. Let's go back and let's go there instead. The funny connection I have to your university is that actually I learned about landscape architecture from some of that was an engineering professor that was at that same university, but he like had friends that were landscape architects or something crazy. And so he told me about landscape architecture when I was really young from that. And I got a whole CD from the university about landscape architecture, which was like mind blowing, right? Back then, like you put I get this package and I put the CD in about learning about landscape architecture. If this is a career I want to do. So anyway, full circle. But I went to the University of Connecticut, and they also do have a strong, because it's an agricultural school from its beginnings, had a really strong it's in the plant science department. And we had a lot of tree ID classes and plant ID. And then I even took like a turf course. Like at one point I knew my grasses really well. Now I do not. So that was where it began for me. And I've always had a love of plants. And then again, I also worked at MVVA for 8 years and really started out there. When I started there, I didn't know this was going to happen to me, of course, but I was going with a lot of the kind of the lead plant securing folks, if you will, the folks that were going out to get the plants and effectively being their assistant, right? Like writing down the numbers of the tags and things and taking the photo. And I just I still love, if I could do that once a week, I would be like so happy. Like that was like my favorite thing to do. Like once, like the first visit, I was like so excited. I'm like, wait, we're going to a nursery? Like we're going to look at plants? Like this is like a job? Like how is this possible? And so like that was any opportunity I had to do that early on and during that. And then also obviously for the projects that I then later was leading, I would be part of that process as well. But just like I still remember, like that was one of the main things that I think MVVA really stressed, which I think is really important, is to get the younger folks out there to learn, because you're learning so much being there and seeing the actual material. You're not only going to remember the plant a lot better if you've seen it, but you also are learning, if someone is there that knows and has done this a lot, like an expert on your team about what type of form you're looking for, like what's the aesthetic for this particular plant, all these things. Like there's just so much valuable information that you're gaining through those on-site nursery, like actual nursery visits.
I want to laugh for a moment with your comment about a CD for recruiting for a university. And we
Yeah.
were talking yesterday just about how technology has changed to allow a relationship between the nursery and a landscape architect to be more seamless. Back in the day when Kasha and I would call these nurseries, we would not only call them to see what was available, but a lot of times if they said yes, we would demand photographs before we would make the nursery trip. And that nursery person would have to go out to the nursery, take their little digital camera, take photos, come back to their computer, upload the images on an SD card, down save them to a smaller size, send them to us via email. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so much easier today to have a good relationship with a nursery person. You develop the relationships, and now I'm on speed dial and text exchange saying, if you're looking for a specimen, for example, of a certain plant material, if you've built that relationship with someone in the nursery trade, you can say, hey, what do you got available for dogwood? What do you got available for magnolia? I
Mm-hmm.
want to see their sculptural form. Can you send me a couple photographs? And you can get a really good feel so much more seamlessly in this digital age that we live in. It's easy to have a good relationship with a nursery.
So a
Yeah.
couple of the questions that we still have out there. Someone says, I work for an association. I'm assuming a trade association. How can we help facilitate these collaborative conversations more so? And one of the other questions is about how far out do you start looking at availability before an intended project deadline? So one of the things I was wondering was when you all have gone out to nurseries that isn't our nursery that we feel like we know. I mean, do you typically feel welcome? Have you ever gone to a nursery where you didn't feel welcome?
Um, I think typically I feel welcome. I think, yeah, I would say typically I feel welcome. And if I feel like I'm not welcome, then I'm probably not going to work with them. So
And you're not coming back. But I mean,
sorry.
more times
No,
than
I'm
not,
joking.
you show up and you're curious and people are excited that you're there and you're curious and um
Yeah. In
so
in general, totally. I think the only time that it's not necessarily you're not welcome, but maybe you're a little bit left to your own like adventure, which is a little odd, but like I totally understand. Like some of these larger nurseries that I've been to, or I don't know, maybe they're more like they're not. I think the difference is that they're not growers. They're maybe gathering a lot of the
like
materials.
a
They're still
re-wholesaler.
wholesale, but yeah, there I feel like it's a little bit more of like, okay, here, yeah, there you go out, find what you need, it's down this road, it's less like somebody's going to go out there with you, like, like
You're
I
more
feel
on
like
your
when
own.
you're at a grower, they want to show you what they've got versus, and they want to take the time versus those locations. I think, again, they're more about like, we're just bringing the plants in, we're selling the plants. Like it's more of a transactional thing, maybe. And maybe that's why.
So for the answer to the question about how can an association help facilitate these conversations and relationships, I'm thinking much of what they do, which is an event, whether it's an ASLA event or a nursery association event at a grower's place or a grower's tour. Or some kind of
Yeah.
networking event where you specifically maybe you have a discussion like this one where you've got the design professionals and the growers together. I was thinking about I was thinking about how do you get new people in the industry to feel encouraged and bold and curious. Maybe I know a lot of ASLA chapters have like a young professionals group. So, bringing that group also, being intentional with that group, that would be some of my thoughts. And then we still have this question, how far out do you start looking at availability before an intended project deadline? Alex, we've been all talking, so assertively. You haven't said a whole lot. Why don't you try and answer that one?
Well, I just wanted to give a little bit of background of my background. I spent 10 years, Brett and I went to school together, spent 10 years as a curator working with artists at contemporary art centers at the Chicago Architecture Biennial. And really the role of research, which kind of goes into this and like planning ahead and anticipating public use of the exhibitions or artworks. But we, like with the Estebarret Manor and Gardens, we were talking with Midwest ground covers from the very beginning and working with Jens and understanding what was available from the very beginning to make those strategic decisions long before the deadline. And we had sort of a compressed timeline with Estebarret of wanting to install it within a year. So we were having those phone calls and conversations with Jens, with Midwest ground covers, sort of at the same time to make sure the planting palette that we were choosing and selecting could be put on a truck and delivered all at the same time because we had a short install window as well. And we were all coming together. Jens was coming in, we were coming in, and the board and staff were also going to be there to help as well. So we had to really coordinate that install effort. So again, we were from the very beginning of the planting design working on the availability and connections with the nursery.
Krista, I have a question for you, if I
Sure.
can interject here. So, you and I have shared a couple of meals where we've talked about supply and demand and how much your business has changed over time, pending what's in vogue. And so, I don't want to just have the main takeaway saying, go to the nurseries and see what's available. But you also talked about this concept of this watershed, renaissance happening and really of this balance of power, if you will, between nursery, landscape architect, installer, of like who's really driving the change of, the junipers and taxus of the 70s dominating the landscape to the contractors and garden centers dominating the need for daylilies and spireas and Carl Forester grasses. I think we are in this watershed moment where natives are having a voice, and I hope that continues. But sort of walk me through that balance of power in terms of who determines your supply and demand from a plant availability standpoint.
So you're asking about how do we as a grower determine what we're going to grow,
Right.
essentially? Well, I think I might have told you that quite literally. I've purchased a couple of different actual crystal balls, and when we do the forecasting, they sit on the table. I think I've passed those on to Shannon because it's almost that mystical. Um, and I mean, part of the challenge for the grower is whether you're talking about trees, which is even a longer time horizon, or you're talking about woody plants and shrubs. We as growers are guessing what the market is going to demand potentially years out. And I also am often saying, like, I've never been to Las Vegas. I probably never need to go because we put our we put our chips on the table when we propagate those cuttings with the expectation of 5 years from now, we're hoping we're guessing right, or however many years from now, or months. So, I mean, we are asking our sales team, Matt, I think, is constantly trying to have his feelers out to understand from all of you, what are you, what are those trends and directions? And then, like, we as a grower this last year took this tremendous undertaking of installing a whole new ERP system, a planning system. And part of our hope to reward with that in the long term is that it allows us to have more insight to notice what's going out the door and do that at a quicker pace and analyze it and then respond and be nimble and make changes really quickly. Because some of the projects, again, if we're not having a conversation far ahead of time, suddenly a whole crop goes out the door. And that was what we had planned based on what we sold the last 3 or 5 years. That's what we had planned to sell for the whole year. So the more nimble we can be, the more our sales team can be attuned in conversation with customers and with designers, which is even, more gives us more long-term future insight. The more those conversations can happen, and then our production team has to be, really, really flexible, working with our sales team. So it's an interesting balance, and I guess I would just reiterate what you said. I do think it's just a super exciting time to be talking about planting design, and I love seeing how much native plants are finding their way clearly, not just in restoration projects, but into homeowners' backyards and into commercial sites. It's super exciting. I just want to make sure. I also, maybe that leads into Matt, maybe we get another conversation, whether it's a webinar or just a discussion about. I do think the whole maintenance and stewardship is just a huge conversation as well.
I
It
think
is, but
that sort of speaks to this whole theme of today, which is get in touch as landscape architects or designers, get in touch with the nurseries directly. Don't let your relationship be through the contractor, because especially with what you just laid out in terms of how you're forecasting what you're growing, it really becomes important that you're hearing what we're wanting on our projects, from
Yeah.
through us. So thank you for that answer.
Yeah, and thank you. I think we're over time now. So again, that was like one of our fears, right, Matt, that we could just talk forever together. Um,
what
and
an opportunity
yes,
it is
yeah,
to keep
yeah.
having this conversation. And as we draw it to a close today, please join us on social media. Please reach out to us. We are always reaching for new relationships, new areas of expertise to advance on the work that we accomplished today. And I have to draw a comparison as we wind this down. The to go out and experience good design. I hope it's good landscape design, but I have to compare it to music. And when you perform with musicians that are better than you're going to perform better. And we're going to keep elevating these crafts in which we're all reaching for virtuosity. And today, I'm so grateful to Kasha and to Brett, who are two extremely talented designers, titans of their industries, for sharing their expertise with us. And I can't wait to see what we can uncover as we stay in touch.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you all of you, Alex, as well. And we look forward to seeing many of our audience members at iLandscape next week. And thanks, Jamie, for holding us all together. See you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Friday.